Hello, everyone, and welcome to another great session of Yoga Readers. Today, we will dive into the fourth chapter of Light on Life by BKS Iyengar. This reading community, the yogic reading community, which is online and for free, and I called it Yoga Readers, was just a thought a few months ago, and today it's a flourishing community. More and more people are joining us, and I'm getting all these great feedbacks from you, so thank you. Keep on sending them, it helps a lot. And I'm glad that there is a need for this coming together, reading together. Some of you shared with me your thoughts about the difference between reading alone and then reading in a group. And it's not that we open our Zoom and each of us is sipping their chai or water and we're drinking by ourselves, we're reading with an open camera, but everyone is doing it in their own pace. But then these are sessions of meeting once every 2 weeks for discussing the thoughts or questions that came up during our reading. That's what this community is about. And of course, we have our Facebook groups. If you have questions during your reading, and my WhatsApp is always available, you can write your questions and I can write a post about it. And of course, I can even have another Zoom session just to talk about a certain question you had. So this fourth chapter is quite amazing, and it discusses the mind or the consciousness. And these are words that I will shift in between. The first thing that is very important to understand is that mind, our thoughts, that this setup or these settings of our thoughts, it's not a spiritual thing. This is very material in the world of Samkhya Yoga. So when we discussed before the Purusha and the Prakriti, the world, the changing phenomenal world, which is finite, and then we had the spiritual element, which is infinite, which is unchanging. Our mind, our thoughts are in the Prakriti, are in the realm of the material world. That's how we can see the material world. And in it, there is a small bit that we can use in order to understand our true nature, the true self, the Purusha. So there is one part in this material setting of our mind, of our consciousness, which is called buddhi, which can turn around. That's the whole yogic aspiration, to turn around the buddhi, and so it can look at the Purusha, at our true self, at the spiritual infinite element of our being. So why do we need to learn all these philosophical terms? Iyengar explains that if we understand how our mind works, how our thoughts operate, we can then take a moment, not act upon these thoughts, stop them perhaps, and then use our, he calls it intelligence, in order to discriminate. And in that point, when we stop, we don't act upon our wishes, we don't act upon our memory automatically, but we stop, we use our intelligence. That moment, he calls it, that's where we have a true will, a free will, and that's freedom. That's freedom of choice. So we have to enact our will, our inner will, and that gives us choice. And he will discuss this again in chapters 5 and 6. So he builds upon chapter 4 in the next chapters. It's not the end of the road, but here it's the opening of these 3 chapters that really talk about the more inner layers. We discussed before the body and then the breath. So the more inner layer, the pranamaya kosha. And here we are going into the 3rd, 4th, and 5th layer, which is actually our mind. So before we go into the book, I want to share with you a diagram that usually helps me explain the idea of the mind according to Samkhya Yoga. So you can see the Purusha, which is here like a sun, because Purusha is many times explained as the light of knowledge, which shines into this part of our mind, of our consciousness, which is called Buddhi. Buddhi is just one part or one sheath or one layer of our mind or consciousness, which is the intellect. In front of it, there is the ahamkara, the ego, the I amness, this idea of our identity, where I was born, how old am I, my gender, my body, and all of this. And in front of it, and I like this diagram because it shows like layers. In front of it, there is the manas, there is the mind. That's the part that thinks. These are all our thoughts, so thought waves. And there are many, many components in the mind. So we will discuss memory, and we will discuss samskaras, so these tendencies and so on. So this light shines through the different layers, and then the mind grasps the world through the five senses. And the five senses are related to the five elements that are in nature. So we see with our sight whatever that can be seen. We smell with our smelling settings, so with our nose, what can be smelled, and so smelled, whatever we can smell, okay, and so on. So these senses, they have a correlation with the world, 5 and 5. Now, usually with our everyday life, this is the arrows that you see, that's how we live. The knowledge that is always there is shining through, and our gaze, our consciousness, our realization is looking outward. And the yogic transformation is shifting the gaze, so we are looking inward. And if we really look inward, and Buddhi is turning, and it's not looking at ahamkara manas, but it's looking at Purusha, that's actually the moment of moksha. That's the moment of enlightenment. That's the realization that we are infinite and so on. So are there any questions about the terminology before we dive into the book? Please open the mics and ask whatever comes to mind. I know you heard about these concepts before. All of you are yoga teachers and yoga practitioners. You heard about manas, ahamkara, and buddhi, and that they are all part of what is called chitta, or our consciousness. You heard all this before, but is something in this process not clear? Okay, great. So all of this is clear. Then we can dive into reading what Iyengar says about it, okay, in chapter 4. So again, as before, there are newcomers today, so I'll explain. We are now going to read from the chapter, but we cannot read 50 pages. So there are selected passages that are marked in yellow, and whoever is willing will open the mic and just read out loud. Then we'll stop and I'll add my something on it. So please.
I'll start if no one else is. You cannot hope to experience inner peace. Can you hear me? Or freedom without understanding the workings of your mind and of human consciousness in general. All behavior, both constructive and destructive, is dependent on our thoughts. By understanding how our thinking works, we discover nothing less than the very secrets of human psychology. With this right perception and understanding of our minds, the door opens to our liberation as we go through the veil of illusion into the bright day of clarity and wisdom. The study of mind and consciousness, therefore, lies at the heart of yoga. Obviously, mind and consciousness are involved at every level of our being, but because of their subtlety, they are considered to reside, as far as yoga's blueprint of humanity is concerned, in the third and fourth sheaths of being. The yogi makes a distinction between the mental body, manomaya kosha, where the incessant thoughts of human life occur, and the intellectual body, vijnana anamaya kosha, sure if that's right, where intelligence and discernment can be found. This chapter deals in detail with the mental body and how the thinking brain, memory, ego, and sensory perception work together, for good or for ill, in our lives. I will introduce the yogic definition of intelligence, making self-aware choices through informed discernment and the exercise of will, but I will return to intelligence and wisdom in the next chapter. It is through this intelligence that we initiate change and free ourselves from ingrained patterns of behavior and steer ourselves incrementally towards illumination and freedom. However, we can hope only to develop intelligence once we understand why we are so often prompted to act without it. Patanjali in his Yoga Sutras chose to make the workings of mind and consciousness, both in success and in failure, the central theme of yoga philosophy and practice. In fact, from the yogi's standpoint, practice and philosophy are inseparable. Patanjali's first sutra says, "Now I'm going to present the discipline code of ethical conduct, which is yoga." In other words, yoga is something you do. So what do you do? The second sutra tells us yoga is the process of stilling the movements and fluctuations of mind that disturb our consciousness. Everything we do in yoga is concerned with achieving this incredibly difficult task. If we achieve it, Patanjali said, the goal and the fruit of yoga will be within our grasp.
Thank you, Karen. So this is the outline of this chapter, basically, and it's the fact that Iyengar mentions Patanjali, he mentions him all the time, but he mentions the first two sutras, which are basically what yoga is about. And yoga is about consciousness. And it's important to say it again and again, because as Iyengar will say in this chapter and the following chapters, we tend to mistakenly think that it's about asana and it's about physical health. But the goal is always the consciousness. The goal is always this mental realm. The goal is always to penetrate deeper, to understand who we are. And as I think it was in the first chapter that he says that we don't have to neglect our body in order to evolve in our mind and consciousness, but we can do both. Here he will say we don't need to stop our thoughts. We don't need to try not to be angry. We are what we are. And there are fluctuations of the mind. Once we reach a certain point, it will stop by itself. So here again, even though the mind is like an obstacle for us, we just need to learn how to work with it. And for that, we have to look at it. And it's like there is this warning, you won't like what you see, because you'll meet whatever is in you. You'll meet your childhood that created memories and then patterns, and you'll meet all the aversions you feel inside and all these deep wishes you have that make you act in a certain way. And he says you have to look at those things, and only then you'll increase your power of intelligence. It's like a muscle for him, and as you use it more and more, that much you'll be more free when you choose how to act in the world, and that will increase your energy. So let's move on. We'll move back to reading now. Whoever wants to continue reading, please, not continue. Who wants to read? So Karen already read. We are jumping to page 109 if you're not on the screen. So please open your mic.
I can read if nobody else wants to. Okay, so yoga has precise definitions of mind and consciousness, and the English words we use do not always correspond well to the Sanskrit. I will explain them as I go along, but suffice to say that normal English usage often uses mind and consciousness synonymously. In the precision of the Sanskrit, mind is described as an aspect or part of consciousness. The mind forms the outer layer of consciousness, citta, in the same way as the skeletal and muscular body is the outer sheath that contains the inner body of vital organs and circulatory and respiratory systems. Consciousness means our capacity to be aware, both externally as well as internally, which we call self-awareness. One good image for consciousness is a lake. The pure waters of a lake reflect the beauty around it, external, and one can also see right through the clear water to the bottom, internal. Similarly, a pure mind can reflect the beauty in the world around it, and when the mind is still, the beauty of the self or soul is seen reflected in it. But we all know what stagnation and pollution do to a lake. As one has to keep the water of a lake clean, so it is yoga's job to clean and calm the thought waves that disturb our awareness. What then are the movements and fluctuations of the mind of which Patanjali wrote? In the image of the lake, they are ripples and waves on its surface and currents and movements in its depths. We all recognize how odd thoughts ruffle the surface of our minds. Oh, I've forgotten to buy the carrots, or my boss doesn't like me. We notice how outside disturbances create inner ones. Their mindless chatter is making it impossible for me to concentrate. In yogic terms, mindless chatter, others or our own, is a lot of distracting ripples. So also do our desires, dislikes, jealousies, doubts, and fears erupt to the surface out of the mind and consciousness. Thoughts arising from memory are considered as a type of wave, as is sleep or daydreaming. Even ignorance is viewed as a type of movement in consciousness. We will look at these later, but the point here is that a great many forces are constantly troubling the lake, muddying the waters and agitating the surface. We can see then that restoring our lakes to a state of limpid, crystalline purity and tranquility is a huge undertaking. So we should first look carefully at our consciousness, see what elements combine to make it up, and analyze how they work together.
Thank you. That was wonderful. I just want you to notice this metaphor of the lake. What I really like about it, well, it's a very clear metaphor, but what I like about it, that a lake is made out of water. And water is very easily, we understand it is material. So when other metaphors talk about the air around us and the vessel, air is difficult to grasp. But water, okay. So if there are ripples in the water, if there are waves, we can see that as material. And if you go into biology, neurology, they will also say that thoughts are, they can be measured. There is electricity that is going on. There are certain hormones and so on and so on. So all these material elements that are tied into thoughts can be understood in the world of Samkhya Yoga, and they can be clearly seen in this metaphor of a lake. Now, there are more layers to it, like the sand in the bottom of the lake, which can be clear or bumpy. But what I would like you to notice is the importance that Iyengar says to the cleanliness of the lake, or the clearness, because the idea is that we should be looking into the lake, not seeing our own reflection, but looking really deep into the lake. And if it's clear, we can see our soul. This idea of looking inward into a lake or inward into our own being is the idea of the lake. Now, many things can stain this appearance, and these can be he will later say impurities that hinder our possibility of sight and so on. But even the idea of waves is very clear, right? If there is a stone that is dumped into a lake, it will create all these ripples, and time is needed to let them disappear. So it's a very clear metaphor that explains this idea of sight, the idea of looking inward, and all the things that can disturb our sight. Now, I don't want us to go into the different parts of consciousness, because that's why I gave you that brief introduction to this. We will just jump into intelligence, which is the most interesting part for me in this chapter. So we are jumping into page 123. And I did this, it would be easier for us. Ta-da! So it's the subchapter of intelligence. So please, if you can open your mic and read. Okay, I'll read, but please, someone will read after me. Intelligence has two overriding characteristics. First, it is reflexive. It can stand outside the self and perceive objectively, not just subjectively. When I am being subjective, I say I hate my job. When I'm being objective, I say I have the skills to get a better job. This first quality makes possible intelligence's second. It can choose. It can choose to perform an action that is new, that is innovative. It can initiate change. It can decide to jump out of the ruts in which we are all stuck and strike out on a path of its own evolution. Intelligence does not chat. It is quiet, determined, clear-eyed, revolutionary of our consciousness. Intelligence is the silent or sleeping partner in consciousness. But when it awakes, it is the senior or dominant partner. If we glance back at the mind, manas, and I-shape, ahamkara, the two conservative stalwarts of consciousness, we will see that logically they are governed by mechanisms that resist change. Mind and the senses that inform it seeks to repeat pleasure and avoid pain. We have seen the rationale behind this, but at the same time must admit that it is essentially a holding pattern of behavior, rooted in the experience of the past. It is in consequence likely to shy away from innovation and thus stifle the possibility of evolution. We saw that I-shape or ego defines itself as the totality of the experiences that have occurred to it in the past: my childhood, my university degree, my bank account. I-shape or ego is the running total of all that has happened up until now. It is in love with the past. Why? What does ego fear most? Its own death. Where is that? In the future. So of course ego is happier with endless variations on the past. It is comfortable rearranging the same old furniture in the same old room and standing back and saying, doesn't it look different? Doesn't it? Yes, it is. No. What ego does not want to do is throw away the furniture and leave the room. That is unknown. The unknown resuscitates all its panic fears of its own impermanence, the fear that one day its impersonation of the true self, the unknown soul, will be unmasked, at which point its existence, as it has hitherto known it, will terminate. Okay, so here he explains the differences between the mind as manas, and ahamkara, the I-ness, the sense of the ego, as he says, the sense of our identity, how they are working and why they are so strong. They are motivated by the fear of death, and they are fueled by our past experiences. He goes on then saying that memory is very important. I hope we'll get to that part today. Memory is very important. Our experiences are very, very much important, but we have to know how to use them. So the whole rationale behind understanding the working of the mind is that we can use it wisely. So it won't stop us in our way, but that it will help us move forward. So now we are continuing in page 125. It's just one paragraph I'd like us to read, and then we're jumping to 126 to 127, just the yellow bits. So please.
Okay, I'll read. What is the advantage conferred by the mirror of intelligence? Simply that we can see objects as if from a distance. Suddenly, the egoic self becomes the object. Normally, it is the subject incapable of seeing things except from its own point of view. A real mirror permits us to see ourselves as if from outside. Therefore, to notice what we could not otherwise see. Food stains on our ties, for example. Thus, we can make changes in our appearances if we are disturbed by the images we see. In fact, consciousness is a double mirror, able to reflect the objects of the world or the soul within. Intelligence performs its task firstly by its ability to freeze frame the flow of thought. This is what we call cognition. Cognition is the process of knowing and includes both awareness and judgment. Cognition allows us to perceive in the present moment at the heart of a situation is a choice. With the image of thought no longer flickering, we see ourselves objectively in a position where we can ask, do I now do this or do I now do that? Time pauses in a moment of awareness and reflection in which suddenly our destiny is ours to command. Do I eat a second scoop of ice cream or do I stop now? The choice may be hard, but at least it is simple. We find ourselves at a parting of the ways that, however trivial in itself, is somehow momentous to us. Imagine you wake up early one morning and ask yourself, shall I get up and do a bit of yogasana practice for once? Or shall I turn over and sleep for another hour? In a way, we desire both, but recognize that this is impossible. There is a choice, a fork in the road before us. Both paths have their attractions, but obviously one is easier than the other. Our cognitive intelligence has brought us to a clear perception of choice, but the moment of decision, we are still stuck. Is the harder path, getting out of bed, really an option? Thanks to the second aspect of intelligence, yes, it is. This is the property of will or volition. This is sometimes called connotation, which is why we say in yoga that intelligence is both connotative and cognitive. Will is what gets our feet out of bed and translates our awareness of choice into action. Will is what converts the harder options from hypothesis into reality. I have often described Hatha Yoga as the yoga of will. Now you are out of bed. The battle is won, but not the war. Would it not be nice now to make a coffee and read the morning paper for an hour? Getting up was an achievement, a step in the right direction, but was it enough? Another moment of cognition, of choice, of the exercise of will. Soon you are doing a yoga practice at 6:30 a.m. This is new at first, an initiation and innovation.
Thank you. So you actually woke up at 4 a.m. to participate in our yoga readers reading community. Great.
Yes, and part of that was because of that passage.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you. So I think we talked before about the metaphor of the mirror. But very shortly or briefly, it's similar to what I explained in the beginning with the workings of the mind, how a mirror can it can show different things. It can show the outside, it can show the inside, and it can be very unclear. If you don't clean your mirror well enough, or if you don't look at it from the right angle, it can show you different things. So it's also similar to the metaphor of the lake. And these metaphors are very common in the Hindu thought in different contexts as well. Now, if you read this chapter, you read his example about the yogi and the ice cream. And he mentions it briefly here as well, but let me just tell you if you haven't. So the story goes like this. So a yogi eats pizza for dinner. I don't know what kind of yogi he is, but he goes home and he's not hungry. And he opens his the fridge and he sees ice cream. Now he's not hungry, but he sees the ice cream and he has this craving to eat the ice cream. So his mind is feeling that craving, the lust, the wanting that is based on the previous memory that ice cream is good. And then he sends his karmendriya, his hand, okay, he uses his body to get the ice cream and he eats it. That's not the yogic way to go about it. And then he says, when you practice and you are more aware of what goes on in there, and you are not hungry, and you see that ice cream, and whatever comes up, because that's how we are. You don't reach for the ice cream. You stop, and intelligence comes in. Intelligence, he says later on, it's like the grown-up in your mind. And the grown-up thinks about the consequences as well. He says, if you eat ice cream at night, you'll get gout, sinusitis, and you'll gain weight. And then you'll hate yourself and you'll have body image issues. And you know you don't want it because tomorrow you'll feel guilty about the choice you did today. And when intelligence, this grown-up, presents this argument, the mind says, well, you know what? Yeah, I really want this ice cream, but I don't want what comes with it. I don't want the consequences. Therefore, I take a choice. And here the choice is not to eat the ice cream. But that's what Iyengar wants us to have. It's not that we can erase the memory of ice cream as a good thing or touching fire as a bad thing. It's good that we have these experiences, the knowledge. It's about not to act automatically by them. Now, he will say later that there are some automations that are good. If you get up at 6 a.m. in the morning and you do your practice again and again, that will become a good habit. So there are good habits and there are less good habits, but it's all about awareness and then choice. So now we continue to page, so only 3 more bits to read, 131. And there will be 2 parts. So 131. Look how comfortable it is now. I took out all the pages we're not reading. So this is about samskara. So we read this part and then 1 more yellow part and we stop. So please.
Okay.
If no one else wants to?
Yes, yep. I don't mind.
Okay, I don't mind either. I'll read. Okay. So, samskara, freeing yourself from habit. If consciousness is like a lake, there are primary waves or fluctuations of consciousness on the surface of the lake. These are easily discernible. An example is that if you are invited to dinner by dear friends and at the last minute they ring to cancel, then you're very disappointed. That is a primary wave on the surface of the lake. You're disappointed, you're unhappy, you feel let down, and you deal with that on the surface. You have to calm yourself down, get over your disappointment. That is a challenge, an external challenge, as it were, that causes a ripple on the surface. The secondary fluctuations or waves are different. Those are the ones that rise up from the bottom of the lake. The bottom of a lake is covered in sand, and so if in your life you experience a sufficient number of disappointments, the ripple on the surface creates a wave that goes down to the bottom, and imperceptibly, that ripple creates a little bank in the sand. So there is a little mound of disappointment. As a result, you will find yourself frequently disappointed or sad, as this mound at the bottom sends off secondary fluctuations or waves. The practice of yoga is about reducing the size of the subliminal mounds and setting us free from these and other fluctuations or waves in our consciousness. Everybody aspires to be free. No one wants to be manipulated by unseen forces, but effectively the banks of samskara in the dark depths of the unconscious do just that. As stimuli from the conscious surface travel rapidly down through the levels of the lake, they encounter uncharted banks of sediment that cause secondary waves of thought. These in turn stimulate, in a way that is beyond our comprehension or control, behavior that is both reactive and inappropriate. Our reactions are preconditioned and therefore unfree. We cannot break out of the old pattern of behavior, however much we long to. In the end, we may accept the situation and just say, it's the way I am. Life always lets me down. Things just make me so angry, or I have an addictive personality.
Thank you. He will discuss these subjects more later in our next chapter. He will explain how memory forms and then what can we do about it, how not to accumulate these disappointments or these experiences moving forward. But here he explains what we already have and what works on us. So even if there are fluctuations by things happening to us and thoughts working from the outside, let's say, there are these small banks in the bottom of the lake that also work on us. So he just says it's a complex machine that works from inside, from the present, from the past events, and there's also fear from the future, as we said, fear from death. So we are now moving forward to page 137. I did that. I'll just read this bit and then we'll go to page 137. Yoga never forgets that the end purpose is not just to remove bad samskara. We also have to cultivate good deeds to build up good samskara. Of course, we first have to weed out the bad, but the yogic compass always returns to the notion of emancipation. So what we want is for the bottom of the lake to be flat so that we don't get any secondary fluctuations bouncing off the bottom. That is freedom. But practically speaking, you can't go from bad samskara in one jump to freedom. You've got to go from bad samskara to good samskara to freedom. It's a logical progression. It's doable. Theoretically, you could go from bad to total redemption, and there may be cases where this happens, but it would be very rare. So he gives us some hope. So please, someone wanted to read before.
The point we are seeking to reach is where we can act directly in the present. Direct action stems from direct perception, the ability to see reality in the present as it is, without prejudice, and act accordingly. This is what it truly means to live in the present moment. If we perceive and act in the present, then we are coming closer to the yogic ideal of what is called an action without taint or without color. Actions are either black, which means they are entirely rooted in selfish motivations and lead to painful consequences, or white, disinterested and good, or, like most actions, gray, in that they stem from mixed motives and therefore bring mixed results. That's the normal way of the world. The yogic action is an action that is absolutely unfettered by past habit and without desire for personal reward in the future. It is the right thing in this present moment just because it is right and it's colorless or taint-free. Its great benefit is that you can act in the world without creating reaction. The benefit of that for a yogi in relation to freedom is that he is trying to free himself from the karmic wheel of becoming. The yogi wants to get off the merry-go-round of cause and effect. He knows that pleasure leads to pain and pain to pleasure in an endless cycle. It is an exhilarating ride, and the goal for most people is to eliminate the pain and experience only pleasure. The yogi knows this is impossible and takes a radical solution of transcending the endless chain of causality. He does not cease to engage in life, on the contrary, but he can act without being tainted. That is why we say his actions are without taint or color, and it's only possible when the ego that rides on the merry-go-round ceases to impersonate the soul. The soul is always outside the game of life, a seer, not a player. And so when the ego-based human consciousness loses its identity in the soul, it can no longer be ensnared in pains and pleasures. The ego is then understood to be no more than an actor's mask for the true self.
Thank you. So that's basically what we are trying to do in our yogic path. And he gives us hope that it's possible and that the tool is in our hands to do so. But we have to realize that after pleasure comes pain and that we cannot have one without the other. We continue to our last bit, which is, I'll read it, page 140. This bit is about memory, but also about our practice. So asana and pranayama teach us how unsolicited thought throws us off balance. Take the standing pose Ardha Chandrasana, half moon asana, balancing on one leg, the other horizontal, arm extended upward. We get the balance, but the moment the thought arises, oh, wonderful, I'm doing it, we wobble or topple. Only in stillness of mind can it be successfully maintained. Similarly, in pranayama, we see how breath and consciousness interact. A disturbances or irregularity is in one creates its counterpart in the other. When breath is calmed and attention focused on its inward movement, then consciousness is no longer jerked by outer stimuli. Similarly, if the consciousness is steady and stable, the breath moves with rhythm. Either way, it is receptive and passive, no more hungrily seeking distraction or entertainment. This frees it to let its attention gravitate toward the most profound level of consciousness in the depth of the lake. Normally, this level appears as our consciousness, as no light of awareness penetrates it. But if the lake is clear, no rising waves can catch us by surprise. There is no mystery here. It is about training, self-education. If we learn reflection and correction in equipoise, where any movement or alteration is detectable and its source revealed, then we have acquired the sensitivity that brings self-knowledge, the threshold of wisdom. We know when we are reacting to an external challenge in a straightforward manner, or when the hidden sandbags of previous conditionings are trying to influence and wrap our response. We can now identify thought as a deliberative, useful, and necessary process, a great gift and talent, apart from thought as meaningless disturbances, mindless chatter, a radio we cannot switch off, and also from thought as a subtle form of interference from the past, a self-sabotaging mechanism lodged in our unconscious memory. All of this list are terms that people use, spiritual teachers use in India to explain the mind, this sabotaging mechanism and so on. We have looked at the process of turning negative habits into positive ones as a prelude to the larger freedom of unalloyed moment-to-moment perception and wisdom. But one might legitimately ask this question: what happens if a negative sandbank has been created in unconscious memory by a single past event, such as a traumatic accident 10 years ago, the spontaneous recall of which may continue to trouble the past as latent, hidden impressions resurface. There is no countervailing positive sandbag we can build up, and so we would seem to be imprisoned by an unchangeable past incident lodged in memory. We are not. Everything I have said about strengthening the nervous system and stabilizing the mind holds good. In addition, there is the old nostrum, time heals. It does, but only if we allow it to. In Western psychology, one recites and reflects repeatedly on one's problems. The rumination reinforces and exacerbates the problem. While revelation can help one to see the samskara, rumination only continues to reinforce it. We all know that a scab that we continuously pick will not heal. In the same way, we have to let old wounds in memory heal over. This does not mean repressing them. It means that what is not fed will wither. A sandbank that we do not add to will gradually erode. The right practice of yoga speeds this process by enabling one to identify the impulses rising from the old imprint and by severing the mechanism that feeds it. Acting on subliminal impulses reinforces them, and so the ability to intercept the rising wave is itself a progressive means of relief. As the rising impulse is stopped before causing a disturbance in our consciousness, we stop it from making a ripple on the surface that will, in addition, return to reinforce the sandbag at the bottom. Okay, this is not trauma-informed yoga, but it's his ideas about strong events that might affect us in the future. So what we'll do now is we divide into small groups, and we will discuss 3 questions that I prepared for you today. You can share from your own experience as yoga practitioners and teachers, or from whatever Iyengar wrote in this chapter, okay, if you're uncomfortable with sharing your own experience. And I will send you them in the chat, so I'll read them out now. So question 1, how does understanding the structure of consciousness affect our ability to act freely? 2, how can yoga free us from the effect of conditioning and memory? 3, how does practicing yoga and pranayama poses increase reason and free will? Thank you all. The discussions were really interesting. So thank you all for sharing your own thoughts and experiences following our reading. As I mentioned before, I will send you a poll or a questionnaire about how you want to proceed with the readings, if the pace is too, if it's too fast, or if there are other things that can help you while you are reading to help you to be more engaged, or any thoughts you may have on our process. I'm really open to hearing your thoughts on this, and thank you very much for today, and we will begin chapter 5 shortly.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so very much.
Thanks so much. Thanks, everyone. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Bye, guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
See ya.